Picture this. You're at the most expensive charity event of the year. 500 people dressed in designer clothes, spending obscene amounts of money to feel charitable. Your husband stands at the microphone and tells everyone you're worthless. He tells them you're broke. He hands you divorce papers in front of judges and senators and billionaires. He tells you to leave through the service exit like you're garbage. And then his face goes completely white when someone walks through those grand doors. Because that someone is your father, a man whose name alone can move markets, a man with more wealth than most small countries. And suddenly your husband understands that he's made the biggest mistake of his life. Stick with me because the story of what happens next is absolutely devastating. The anniversary gala, held at the Plaza Hotel, 500 people who mattered, tech executives, venture capitalists, politicians, judges, the kind of event where a single connection could launch you forward or destroy you completely. Olivia stood in the penthouse suite and tried to force her breathing to remain normal. She wore the dress her husband had selected. Midnight blue, expensive, designed to make her look beautiful but not memorable. An accessory, not a person. She'd spent 3 years learning to be exactly what Ethan Caldwell wanted her to be. Quiet, compliant, empty enough to hold whatever role he needed her to play. Not complicated by thoughts or opinions or needs of her own. The job had been exhausting, but it had worked. He'd built an empire. He'd become exactly what he'd always wanted to be. Important, powerful, unstoppable. What Olivia didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that the performance was about to end, and not in any way she'd rehearsed. The evening began like every other high-stakes social event: cocktails, networking, forced laughter at terrible jokes made by men used to being laughed at. Olivia stood beside Ethan, smiling when appropriate, saying nothing when possible, her hand touching his arm the way he preferred. A decoration, a statement about his choices and his success. That's what she'd become. Then, around 9, Ethan excused himself. He took her hand and led her to the staircase. The grand staircase. The one where people were announced. The one reserved for moments. Without explanation, he pulled her toward the microphone. She whispered, "Ethan, what are you doing?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Something necessary," he said. He tapped the microphone. The room went quiet. He began speaking about their marriage with the precision of someone reading from a prepared script. But the words that came out weren't about love or partnership or celebration. They were about contempt. He called her a parasite. He said she'd contributed nothing. He said she came from nothing, was nothing, would always be nothing without him. Then he did something that silenced the entire ballroom. He pulled divorce papers from his jacket. Real papers. Not a joke. Not a performance for entertainment. Actual legal documents he'd been carrying around all evening. He handed them to her with the kind of public cruelty that only works if you believe the victim deserves it. "Sign them," he said into the microphone. "Right now, in front of everyone. Show these people what happens when someone tries to drag down a self-made man." His executive assistant, a woman named Miranda that Olivia had been smelling on his clothes for months, laughed from the crowd. Actually threw a pen up the stairs at her. The room erupted. Not in horror, in fascination. These were people who loved a good fall, especially when it was someone else's. Olivia looked down at the papers with hands that had gone numb. She understood that this moment, right here, was the culmination of 3 years of choosing the wrong person, of believing that if she just made herself small enough, quiet enough, compliant enough, she'd finally be loved. She understood that she'd been wrong about everything. But before she could sign those papers, before she could finalize her humiliation, something happened that changed the entire trajectory of the evening. The grand doors at the back of the ballroom opened. The real grand doors. The ones that required security clearance and advance notice. The ones reserved for dignitaries and presidents, and the kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself. 5 men walked in. The first was tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars. His presence alone made the room recalibrate. James Hart. That was the only name that needed to be said.
Everyone in that room, everyone who understood finance and power and the way the world actually worked, recognized that name. James Hart was the ghost that moved markets. The man who owned things so valuable and so important that he rarely needed to be seen in public. His company, Hart Global Holdings, had a net worth that sat somewhere north of $40 billion. But the real power wasn't in what people knew about him, it was in what they didn't. The things he kept private, the deals that happened in rooms without windows, the influence that moved with a single phone call. Ethan's face went completely white. For a moment, his entire performance collapsed. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Miss Hart," he managed, stepping forward. "This is such an honor. I had no idea you were coming." But James Hart wasn't looking at Ethan. His eyes moved across the room until they found Olivia at the top of the stairs, holding divorce papers, tears streaming down her face. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, not shock, recognition. And then something else. Fury. "Where is my daughter?" he asked, his voice cutting through Ethan's babbling like a blade. The room went so quiet you could hear champagne bubbles popping. Ethan's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then slowly, inexorably, the beginning of understanding. Olivia descended the stairs slowly, holding the divorce papers, her dress catching the light as she moved. When she reached her father, she kissed him on the cheek. "I'm okay now," she said quietly. Just like that, everything shifted. The power dynamic, the narrative, the entire evening inverted completely. The girl Ethan had been calling worthless was suddenly the daughter of the most powerful man in the room. "My name," Olivia said, her voice steady in a way it had never been before, "is Olivia Hart, daughter of James Hart. I use my mother's maiden name in my personal life by choice, not deception." Choice. "I disclosed my real identity to you before we married." She turned to face Ethan, and her composure was absolutely terrifying. "You just didn't consider it important enough to remember." Her 4 brothers appeared at the edges of the room. They'd been waiting, positioned, ready. David the oldest, Michael, Thomas, Andrew. Each one a version of power wearing an expensive suit. Each one watching the moment their sister finally stopped hiding. Hart Global owned 42% of Caldwell Technologies. This fact was delivered by David Hart with the precision of someone who'd been waiting to say it. The investment had been made 4 years ago when Olivia had worked for her father in venture capital. She'd recommended it. She'd believed in Ethan. That belief had cost her family billions, a fact that was not mentioned but understood perfectly. "Your company exists because my family decided to save it," David continued. "The investment that pulled Caldwell Technologies from bankruptcy 18 months ago came from Hart Global's portfolio. My sister signed off on it. My sister, a woman you just publicly called worthless in front of 500 people." But Ethan wasn't listening to David anymore. He was staring at Olivia with an expression shifting between desperation and rage. She'd done this. She'd planned this. She'd been setting him up the entire time. None of it was real. Their marriage, their life, all of it was an elaborate scheme. "Actually," Thomas interjected, "it was quite real from her end. My sister loved you, which is why we didn't tell her about the embezzlement." Ethan's face went absolutely still. "The $2.3 million that's missing from company accounts, the transactions you were routing through your mistress's consulting firm, the vacation homes and cars and jewelry purchased on company credit that you claimed were business expenses. All of that is real, and all of it is traceable." Andrew, the youngest brother, was the one who spoke the words that broke Ethan completely. "You called our sister broke," he said it flatly. "You humiliated her in public. You told her to leave through the service exit like she was garbage." His jaw clenched. "Nobody does that to a Hart, not and walks away." James Hart moved closer to his daughter and placed a hand on her shoulder. The gesture was both protection and declaration.
"She's under our protection," his body language said, "which means you're about to experience what happens when you hurt someone we love." An emergency board meeting was convened by midnight. Ethan was removed as CEO before the clock struck 1. Hart Global was exercising its option to take controlling interest in Caldwell Technologies, effective immediately. The company's entire financial structure was placed under investigation. Fraud charges were being prepared. Criminal prosecutors were being contacted. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Ethan Caldwell's empire had collapsed. Not dramatically, not messily, with the precision of people who'd been preparing for this possibility for years. Every asset was frozen. Every account was seized. Every business relationship evaporated as partners sensed the shift in power and distanced themselves accordingly. The public humiliation came next. News broke within hours. Billionaire CEO exposed for embezzlement. Tech entrepreneur's wife reveals her true identity. The media ate it alive. Ethan tried to contain the narrative, hiring expensive lawyers, positioning himself as the victim. But the evidence was too clean, too well documented, too devastating. By day 3, Ethan had lost his company, his reputation, his freedom. Criminal charges were filed. The FBI was involved. His assets were seized and frozen. The woman he'd called broke and worthless had taken everything from him using nothing but the truth. But here's what makes this story more complicated than simple revenge. Ethan disappeared, literally vanished. Not through criminal deception, through betrayal far greater than anyone had anticipated. Intelligence services discovered he'd been a pawn in a much larger game, a conspiracy reaching higher and deeper than anyone had imagined. The Beaumont Group, a shadow investment consortium operating in darkness for decades. They'd targeted Ethan years ago, groomed him, positioned him, and then used him as a weapon against the Hart family. The public humiliation hadn't been Ethan's idea. It had been ordered. The divorce papers had been demanded. The cruelty had been orchestrated by men he'd never even met. A woman named Victoria Ashford appeared in Olivia's life. She claimed to have evidence. She claimed Ethan was running from the same people who'd used him. She claimed that the flash drive Ethan possessed contained proof of decades of corruption that could bring down one of the most powerful organizations in modern business history. What followed was a game of cat and mouse spanning months. Ethan reached out to Olivia. He confessed everything. He gave her the evidence in the form of a flash drive tossed into darkness during a confrontation that left everyone questioning whether he'd survive. He chose his own protection over his own safety, ensuring the evidence would reach people who could actually use it. Olivia took that evidence to authorities. The investigation that followed was massive, coordinated across multiple agencies, international in scope. By the time arrests were made, 18 executives were charged with conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and a dozen other federal crimes. Ethan Caldwell was never found. Some say he's in witness protection. Some say the Beaumont Group killed him. Some say he's living on a beach somewhere under a different name. Olivia never found out. But a year after the gala, a single postcard arrived at her office. A tropical beach. One word on the back: free. Here's what most people don't understand about this story. This isn't about revenge. It's not about a woman using her family's wealth to destroy a man. It's about a woman discovering who she actually was underneath the performance. Olivia Hart didn't become powerful the night her father walked through those ballroom doors. She became powerful the moment she stopped hiding. She became powerful when she chose to use her real name. She became powerful when she admitted that she'd chosen to marry someone who didn't deserve her, and she accepted responsibility for that choice. The Hart global empire is now run by Olivia, not her father, not her brothers, Olivia herself. She took control of Caldwell Technologies and transformed it into a company built on transparency and integrity. She became the CEO that Ethan had been pretending to be. She testified at the trials against the Beaumont Group. She gave her evidence, told her truth, and watched men go to prison for decades for the crimes they'd committed. She didn't feel satisfied by their imprisonment. She felt relieved, free, like something that had been pressing down on her entire life had finally been lifted. Ethan became a cautionary tale, a man who'd wanted to be powerful so desperately that he let other people define what power meant. A man who'd chosen cruelty over compassion and discovered too late that compassion was the only thing that might have saved him. But Olivia Hart became a legend, not because her family was rich, because she was brave, because she chose honesty over comfort, because she looked at the most powerful people in her industry and said, "Not good enough. I know what integrity looks like, and you don't have it."
The men who underestimate women are often the same men who don't understand how power actually works.
Real power isn't about taking up the most space. It's about knowing exactly how much space you deserve and refusing to occupy less. Real power is about seeing your own value when everyone around you is telling you you're worthless and deciding that you believe yourself instead. Olivia Hart stood in front of a man who tried to destroy her with nothing but the truth. That truth was more powerful than any weapon, any amount of wealth, any performance of strength. The truth was that she'd always been exactly who her father recognized her to be. She'd just forgotten to recognize it herself. So here's my question for you. How many times have you let someone convince you that you're less than you actually are? How long did you believe it before you finally saw yourself clearly? That's the real story here. Not about a man falling, about a woman standing up. If this story moved you, if you felt the power in Olivia's quiet strength, if you found yourself rooting for her not because of her family's wealth, but because she refused to disappear, then hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their value doesn't come from anyone else's opinion. Subscribe because we're telling stories about real transformation, about quiet power, about women who finally stopped performing and started living. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.